Good, pardon me. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Topical Employment Webinar by DBHR for the month of March. We've had a change, and I apologize. The gentleman that was supposed to do motivational interviewing ended up having a conflict and had to cancel doing the webinar, but hopefully we'll do the webinar again at a later date. What we are going to do today is we're going to talk about the career profile. And I just have to say it's something near and dear to my heart because I am, pardon me, because I'm a fidelity reviewer and I am also a trainer. I do a lot of looking at documentation that exists within the files in different agencies. And a career profile is one that has so much potential and is rarely completed in an effective manner. And I think in part because of the attitude that it's just a document, just a form. And so you can see the title of the presentation is Career Profile, Not Just a Form, How to Build Rapport While Completing Necessary Documentation. And that's what we're going to discuss today. As seems to be the case so very often, with technical difficulties for all of us, my colleague Darren is currently having technical difficulties, and so hopefully he'll be able to join us in a bit. If not, I will be doing my part and his until such time as he's able to attend the webinar. So I guess part of what I'm saying is this is a little bit impromptu, and that's okay because I would love to have a casual conversation about the career profile and kind of the way that it looks. Pardon me, and I apologize. I also have allergies acting up today. I see Luann says, I thought this webinar was for motivational interviewing. It was, and the gentleman had to cancel. And so in order to avoid canceling the webinar altogether, we substituted another topic. I do hope that you'll continue to attend and hear what we have to say because I think the topic is going to be one that would be really beneficial to you. We hope to have motivational interviewing as part of the schedule again later on. So I apologize for that. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. And like I say, I hope that Darren is able to, to join us at some point in time. I say I'm going to get started now if the slides will advance. Do you ever just have one of those mornings where you'd like to start over again? This could be one of those. And I apologize. All right. There we go. So related to training objectives, I really hope to be able to change some thinking about the intent of the career profile. If you're one of those folks that are just looking at it as a document to be completed, and frankly, one that you'd rather not have to do, I'm hoping to change some minds about that. Hoping to enhance the interviewing skills in order to complete this and other documents. Darren, in one of his slides, has touched upon some of the motivational interviewing techniques, and that will be something that's presented later on in the presentation. I'm going to share information about making the profile a relationship building event as opposed to just completing a document. Going to educate regarding the place of the career profile in fidelity and in real life. Yes, it's required for fidelity, but it's so much more than that. Going to discuss a little bit how to approach completing it. And we're going to discuss including family members or others close to the person, really in part to start building that support team around the person. Those of you that are pretty familiar with IPS know that one of the key concepts is that it really is about building a support team around a person in order to help them be successful over time. I will say do please use the chat box if you have questions. You can also raise your hand and I can unmute you if you would prefer to ask your question verbally. And with that, I'll get started into the meat of things. By the way, I'm Dawn Miller and I'm with the Healthcare Authority. And 2 days ago celebrated my 3rd year anniversary with the Healthcare Authority. So glad to be here this morning. So the career profile is a document. It is one required by Fidelity. It is one that exists on the ipsworks.org website. If you choose to download it and use it just as is, it's a long document. But I will also say that it can be customized. It can be changed a little bit for your agency and information added or subtracted as needed. I would caution you, if you're going to change the document, to do it in a really mindful manner and to do it in an organizational level. So to take a look at it along with your supervisor and maybe leadership and decide the things that should remain in it. Closer to the end of the webinar, partway through the webinar, I guess I should say, we're going to bring up the career profile form and just discuss it kind of piece by piece. And so you'll get a chance to look at some of the things that could be customizable. You're going to get a chance to look at just the items in general and kind of the intent behind them. One of the things that I would say as a Fidelity reviewer and just as a past supervisor of a supported employment program, it is so important to fill out that form and any other form completely. Anytime you leave open blanks, it causes whoever's looking at it to wonder, why didn't they complete it? Is this complete? Maybe it is and they just didn't fill in some of the blanks. But please fill it out completely. Part of the reason for that is when we get into the actual tool itself, one of the pages in there is a disclosure form. Disclosure is also required by individual placement and support. And so if you, in fact, you use the form and you use that disclosure piece, you've addressed to some degree disclosure within Fidelity and are going to get a higher score. Same kind of thing with benefits planning. It has a section within the career profile that if you fill it out, that suffices for part of what you need to do for benefits planning. Yes, Lynn, the address where you can access it is ipsworks.org. All right. And then the career profile, in my mind, is the ultimate tool for making good job matches. The better you are about getting to know the person and what it is that they want, including from their past work experiences, from their educational experiences, just kind of in general, it's a good all-around tool. The better you're going to make a good job match. Have you ever gone out and done job development and you've had an employer say, oh, we've worked with you guys before and that didn't go well? I know I have over the years, and sadly I've had it happen more than once. And when in fact it wasn't actually our agency that they worked with, it was a different agency that perhaps didn't do right by the employer. Doesn't take long, especially if you're in a smaller rural area like I am. I'm in Moses Lake. It doesn't take long for employers to start spreading the word about you don't want to work with ABC agency if we're not doing well by them. This is a tool that will help you to get to know the person as well as you possibly can, as well as we can know anybody, in order to try and make that good job match so that the person you're sending to an employer is hopefully the right fit. So what other, and please do use the chat box for this, why else do you think the career profile could be beneficial? What other things about it make it something that you would want to use? Does anybody have other ideas? And I'm going to give you a second to kind of think about that. While you're thinking, I'm going to list some of the things that come to my mind as well. I know agencies have turnover. And when they have turnover, it's sometimes a struggle to get a new staff and then get them up to speed in regards to working with that new caseload. This is a document that can help new staff to know what's going on with a person so that they don't, they can kind of hit the ground running, if that makes sense. I see Carrie, hi Carrie, says another reason may be for storage for the client. They have access to the report, resumes, etc. It does in fact have a section that starts out, I've got a hi Don and a smiley face. Thank you, that made my day. It does have a section that starts working on the resume. So it does have a section that can be, printed out in order to help the person start working on their resume. I see Darren has been able to join us, so I'm feeling happy about that because it's been one of those mornings, as I mentioned. So what other reasons do you think the career profile might be something that you would want to use? What's beneficial about it? Do you ever have one of those not enough coffee mornings where you couldn't organize two thoughts if somebody paid you to? And by golly, they are paying you to. What do you know? The career profile is one of those kinds of things that has all the questions you're going to need to ask laid out in one document. It makes it easier for you to remember what it is that you need to ask the person in order to get to know them, because it's right there. So one of the things too about the career profile is that it was developed through research by Dartmouth University and by the agencies that were doing IPS. So this isn't something that's just kind of willy-nilly, yeah, this might be a good thing to ask. It really truly is developed through the long-term work and the thought of the different staff that worked on putting it together based on what works and what people need to know. So that's a benefit to you as well. You don't have to try and recreate the wheel. You don't have to figure out what kinds of things should I ask the person. That's been done for you. Anything that can make our jobs easier, because we have jobs that are difficult, rewarding, amazing, wonderful, and difficult. So anything that can make your job a little easier is probably a good thing. All right, let's see if I can actually get the slides to advance. Or not. And I will tell you, I've now tried advancing 3 times. There we go. Now we've got it. So I don't know about you, and I like people. I like getting to know people. I like working with people, but I've yet to meet a person that was an absolute open book on the first time that you met him. And because of that, when you're trying to get to know a person, you're going to have to do it over a period of time. I don't know of any shortcut to that. It truly is, this can be a relationship building tool, particularly if you handle it in such a way as to have kind of a casual conversation. We'll talk about that in a minute. My thought process is that this helps you to get to know the person because of the fact that it's so very complete. But it also starts to be a relationship building tool with the employer. And I say that because what you're going to do is also, it says trust. You're going to build trust with the person on your caseload. You're going to build trust with the employer if they know that you are doing some pre-screening, that you know enough about the person to be able to give them accurate information about what that individual can do and maybe where they need some accommodations. And so trust is a big piece of this in regards to completing and being able to build that relationship. I mentioned I'm going to talk a little bit about how to complete the career profile. I would love to have a tally of how many I've completed over the years. Hundreds, I'm sure. And so at one point in time, at least, I was pretty familiar with the document. And rather than sitting down and asking a question by question kind of a thing, I would just sit down and say, tell me about yourself. Tell me a little bit about why you came in today and what kinds of help I can provide you, and your background, and let's get to know each other a little bit. And I would handle it that way, and then take notes and then document the responses, either by kind of flipping back and forth through the vocational profile and documenting on that, or taking my notes after the fact and transposing them into the document. Are you going to miss some areas? Yeah, and you will ultimately end up having to ask some questions, but it ends up making it a familiar or a friendly conversation as opposed to I say interrogation. That's probably too strong a word, but you know what I mean. When somebody sits down and asks you a lot of questions that you've got to answer, it feels a little cold, as opposed to having a conversation with the person, and that feels warmer and friendly. So is something, that's typically the way that I handle it when I did it. And one thing that's important to remember is within IPS Fidelity, it says the career profile should be completed over 2 to 3 sessions. So what they're saying is a variety of things. They recognize that you don't build that relationship in one session. They recognize that it's long and that you need to be able to ask the questions and fill it out completely. They recognize that it's going to be a process in which, perhaps the person answered a question in one way last week and they remembered additional information this week because you started them thinking, you started kind of the thought process going in regards to what did I do in the past? What did I like? Who is also familiar with me that would be able to answer some of those questions and help me out to complete this process? One of the things that I would say too is as you're completing the career profile, and career profile and vocational profile have been used interchangeably. So if you hear one or the other, it's the same thing within IPS at least. When you work on completing the career profile and when you have a fidelity review, and I'm saying, notice I say when and not if, I'm hoping everybody will opt to have a fidelity review at some point in time. And the reviewers look at, are you looking for a job that's based on what the person said they wanted to do? And that information comes from the career profile. And a lot of times what we'll see is we have people that maybe they want to be a nurse, but right now they're willing to work at Walmart, but it's not documented that way in the career profile. So I would encourage everybody to consider, sometimes there are long-term career goals, sometimes they're short-term career goals, and you work on both. And so document both. Looks like we have another question. Okay, looks like this was not what Luann was hoping for. So
hey, good morning, John. I just wanted to jump in and let you know I kind of made it.
Okay, yay, Darren. Good for you for working through the technical difficulties this morning. I'm going to finish up this slide and I'm going to turn it over to you. So your timing is perfect.
Oh, really? Okay, yay.
Yeah, yep, you're good. And I can go ahead and advance slides, so especially with the difficulties you're having at this point in time with internet. Lynn asked, do we have access to the slides? Absolutely. We will send them out after we're done here, and I'll send out that ipsworks.org web address and also some other information. So typically when we do a webinar, once we're done, we send out a thank you for attending, and we give additional information based on what people have been asking in the webinar and just some general resources that we always share. So back to the long-term and short-term career goals. It's okay to help a person get a survivor job. Over the years, lots and lots and lots of times people came in and said, right now I just need a job to keep a roof over my head. And obviously if that's a need for the person, that's something that we try and do. That doesn't mean we have to quit working with them once they get that survivor job. We can continue working on the long-term career goals and should. Part of it is about networking also. Some of the questions in the career profile also link to who do you know, what jobs do they have jobs of interest to you? So when you're doing the career profile, part of the consideration is building that support team around people for the networking potential as well as for the support potential. How many of you have ended up getting a job because of somebody you knew? And you don't necessarily have to put it in the chat, just think about it. If you're like me, probably 2/3 of the jobs that I've gotten, including this one, were because of people that I knew. And the same kind of thing can happen with the folks that we serve. Sometimes it's a harder stretch because they don't have as many people that remain in their kind of social network, but that's something that's still important. The greater majority of jobs that are found over time, I want to say it's 71%, are found because of networking. Not because of ads, not because of Indeed, not because of, so many of the other things that we use, WorkSource, but because of networking. All right, Darren, and I am going to turn it over to you for the next slide. Are you set?
I think so.
Cautiously optimistic.
I'm on the edge of my seat. It hasn't been a fun technology day. So good morning, everybody. This is Darren Paschke. I'm Don's counterpart in providing supportive employment and IPS services to Washington State. So I do apologize for tech issues today. You just never know when the gremlins in the machine are going to make you sit down and reboot. So I went through that, but I lost my audio. So I have my trusty cell phone here with one bar. So hopefully it'll keep me connected to go through this. So I just want to follow up a little bit what Dawn was saying about this is, an active listening process, an engagement process, and it takes multiple appointments. I just was in an IPS review yesterday, looking at career profiles and looking at things, and I was so pleased to see there were like 4 different appointments this one employment specialist had before this profile was completed, because they broke it down into different sections, and they really were, gathering the information. They would then do a little bit of research on the job goal, provide that information back to the client, and have a different conversation. And this person, had the dream job goals, and the employment specialist actually worked on those. And then with the information coming back, they had to readjust. So it was a very interesting process. It was definitely back and forth, but in between appointments, the employment specialist was doing some really good research to educate the job seeker in what the next step was. So that's part of those habits. I think in my former role as an employment services manager, and that I've done job development, employment services, we do get into habits. And I was definitely somebody who's very goal orientated. Check off those boxes, move to the next thing, move on to the next thing, because sometimes in your job as an employment specialist, you're really busy. There's productivity demands. There's so much demands to try to get through things. But this is the one thing where it really takes some time to just practice talking to people and being a really good active listener. So there's some growth on both, sides of the table. And don't exclude some of the friends and families, associates that the job seeker might have to give you extra information. Definitely for some of the younger clients that myself and my staff served as other agency, because within FCS you can start at age 16. Some of those are really key indicators and support people to get a different perspective and what might be very helpful. And as Don said, this might start out with a survival job idea, but always having in the background that more robust career orientated next step for the job seeker to grow. Next slide, Don.
Hopefully. There we go.
We're growing. So this is my fun one. I love the otter. Especially when I was making this slide, I was watching Georgia Aquarium special, and it was about otters. So I thought this is just like something I needed to have a little fun in my presentation today. So, once again, we really want to focus on the job seeker and learn more about them. And it's okay to ask how they feel things are going. Maybe there's some new challenges in their life. We've all gone through such horrendous change in adapting to COVID, and it's impacted each of us in many different ways. I've talked to some people who stopped the process because they didn't want to leave their home because of the safety and concerns, or maybe they had to take care of family members. We can still do some of that research and still engage with those people virtually, like we're doing today, but also be able to kind of maintain that fluid process during the process. Active listening has been really hard for me as a clinician, because I always want to move ahead. I always wanted to get the resume down. I always wanted to get out and meet employers, because for me, that was the really fun part of the job. But not everybody was at my pace. And when I went out talking to employers, I had to really listen to what the employers were saying as well, so I could bring that information back as part of my research and part of the education. So definitely it's something I have struggled with a lot. And I have found out I can learn more about the people that I work with if I'm able to slow down, take better notes, listen more. So that's my little bit of growth that I've had over the years. We'll have unique things about the other person that we're only going to learn about is through conversation or ask how things are going. Maybe we're assigning things to folks. We need to be able to do that check-in to see how things are going, or find out how people had dealt with challenges in the past. How did certain things work for them? You know, try to get away from those yes and no answers, which can be very abundant in all the forms that we do, but try to keep them open-ended so we have some more dialogue for folks. And it's okay to come back and relook at forms. Maybe sometimes that's just a date in the per contact note and your DAP note that you're saying reviewed the goals remain the same, or because of the research or because of the conversation I had, maybe you found some more information out about medication issues and some reactions, you know, how someone is using natural supports and they really need to be in the community at a different time, or maybe they're using, you know, faith-based supports or a recovery cafe, something like that, so that we get that full perspective of all the things that people are using for their own recovery and their own success. And it's okay to take breaks. We all need to breathe, especially if you look at the document. I think it's about 13, maybe 14 pages. And if you're doing some things online, it can be layers and layers. It's a lot of information and it can be daunting. It's okay to kind of break it down and just check in with somebody sometimes, like, how are you doing with all these answers? People can definitely feel a bit overwhelmed at times. So definitely we all need to remember to breathe, and that this is a process. It's not a race to the finish line, even though I'm guilty of that too. I want to get out in the community. Okay, no, that's fine.
Now it advanced when I didn't want it to.
That's a good, you know, segue. So you have to honor that the title of this presentation today was going to be about motivational interviewing. I just want to kind of, you know, get a little bit of flavor into that, because the nice thing about MI is it's person-centered, and the job seeker, or if you're providing post-support service to somebody, that they're in the driving seat. They provide that direction. And it's our job to do some reflection, how those things are working for you, what kind of things you can do to support the people, to break down maybe some ambivalence, maybe some fear, maybe it's just getting re-energized, to validate that somebody has skills. There was a time I was working with a very young man who was still in school, and he really felt he had no skills. So we really worked together, and I was able to bring in a family member, a sister, to help work with the process. But just getting something on a sheet of paper that somebody can take with them and look at those skills and abilities can be very empowering. And this document can really encapsulate some of those moments where it's just like, I do have people skills. I do have active listening skills. I know how to keep appointments. I do like to work with people, or maybe some awareness. Maybe I don't like to work with people and I need a different kind of environment. Just being sensitive to all those things. I know there was a time, not so much in this last year, but there's times where I like to try new things, whether it's a new sport or maybe a sporting activity. I always have some ambivalence. Am I really going to like this? Is this for me? And then maybe I watch some YouTube Maybe I watch some programs on Netflix. It's like, wow, this is fascinating. So even myself, I've had some ambivalence, but being able to get some resources or talking to somebody who's done some of that, it's a step towards change. So I know I'm guilty of this. I kind of stay in my own lane. Sometimes I've been told to stay in my own swim lane. So I'm trying to be respectful of that too. But it does take some time to change. It takes repetition and support, because we all need that reassurance and validation. It's okay to broaden our swim lane or even change directions, that there's no penalty for that. Actually, it can be really healthy to find a job match later.
One of the things that I like about motivational interviewing is you're eliciting from the person what their idea is. How many times as a worker have we, if you will, kind of told the person maybe, you need to consider this or that? And how often do you run into resistance? As opposed to, one of the beauties of motivational interviewing is that you're eliciting what it is that they want to do. You're asking open-ended questions, and they give the answers to that, as opposed to, if you will, telling them what to do and having that resistance end up being a piece of kind of where you're at. Sorry, that's the thing that motivational interviewing that I thought really resolves getting stuck, for one thing. It also resolves, kind of a person dropping out because they're feeling valued and listened to.
Absolutely. It's about that validation and value, and some reflection as well. So thank you for that, Don. I think a lot of us are in this profession because we're very compassionate and compassion for the person. That also means we have to recognize putting the client's needs first. And definitely I've seen the evolution of supportive employment processes over the years, and I would work in programs where it's just like, well, today you're going to do this. Really taking the power and choice from somebody. And that's what's so nice about the IPS model, is like it is so focused on client choice. And it's so rewarding when I go and visit agencies and you can see that the employment specialist talks about client choice, then the clinicians you talk about client choice, and then the executive team, that's part of their core values for the agency, is that compassion where they put the client's needs first. This is a partnership. We can definitely go out as job developers and do a lot of job development, but if we're not focused on the client's needs and abilities and skills and desires, that's just a silo full of stuff and outcomes. So it's really that relationship between the clinician, you as an employment specialist, or maybe even some of the partnerships with expanded with the clinical team or SUD support team or peer support team, those partnerships to really recognize the strengths, and as that holistic approach, being able to document that in the career profile that we're going to be looking at today. I wasn't sure if there's a next one or not, Dawn.
Yep, there is, in fact. There you go.
Okay, thank you. So there are some key ingredients that I think is really important for a program. When I go in to do IPS reviews, I talk to the management team. How many people do you think the supportive employment program employs? How many people just got jobs in the last quarter? Being able to have a place where this data and the metrics are, available to staff and management, I think is so beneficial. And as somebody who was a manager of a program and worked with stakeholders, there was nothing better than I could do than send my stakeholders like, wow, thank you for the support. Here's the outcomes that you helped provide, and really strengthen those relationships. So I think it validates the really hard work and successes of employment specialists in the program, the supervisors and managers, and all the way up to executive change. It's important to keep track of what you're doing. Everything, from my perspective, is revolving around metrics. And if you're able to use performance guides and Excel sheets, and we have some of these and some of the references at the Pathways to Employment site, it's a good foundational step to really look at how we bring metrics in to track what we're doing, and getting closer to those outcomes of working with the client-centered goals and helping them achieve their employment goals. A real important part of what we do in the IPS reviews is we look at when somebody comes in and that rapid job search process. It's been very, very difficult for programs that I've worked with across the state for this metric right now. But as we finally have things changing in a very positive way, we hope to see more employment specialists out building those relationships with employers and starting to capture those critical entry points into the system and into the community. That ties into setting goals, percentage of time in the community. I know IPS has a very significant goal of 65%, and that's a goal. It's not a mandate. It's something to work towards. I've seen some really great programs spend 45% of the time in the community. That's just not always with employers, but that could be with Social Security, with benefits. That could be with the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation. That could be with some other supports to coordinate services to support the client in their journey. I just heard a fantastic story, shared story. This is why I love doing IPS reviews, because you learn these incredible things. That there was a client who was blind and deaf, and her goal was to be a barista. So the employment specialist was doing some research about that. But they were also coordinating with DBHR and DSB and supporting some training for this person. So there's all these different almost commodities for stakeholders that can support the client that you can have those contacts with to make it more robust in terms of how you meet the client in the community, employers in the community, those entities that are really supporting the client to move towards greater independence and autonomy in the communities that they are. I think this is so critical as just for you to monitor the relationships you have with clients and being able to document it. And the HCA has a great Golden Thread series coming up, I think starting in April, multiple part series, but very in-depth. It gives you a lot of structure to focus on medical necessity, note structure. The agency I just reviewed yesterday focused on, a DAP note structure, so you have the action, what's going on, the action, and the plan. There's always some plan and some follow-up, which kind of guides you through the next series of services that you're going to be able to provide and very individualized. Sometimes I've seen programs update the career profile every 2 months, every 3 months, every 4 months, every 6 months. I think that's all part of quality assurance, is that you're coming back and revisit goals, adherence, and things that have changed. I think in my own personal life, nothing stays the same every 6 months. Something has always changed, and it's always good to sit down and kind of see what those markers are so that we can provide maybe support, maybe have another provider come in and do support. So this isn't all just about checking off in the career profile, but it's making sure the team is aware, maybe through that integration you have with behavioral health or SUD or peer services to provide more of those supports. the client is in the driver's seat. We want to be very respectful of that and make sure we're supporting them and giving the information that they need to be successful, over time. Tracking forms are very efficient, and definitely, we can provide some information. The IPS library online, ips.org, has a ton of information, and Pathways to Employment is another great resource for folks for forms. Okay, Don.
So I will say this is the end of our actual slide presentation. We were going to go through the career profile at this point in time. I'm going to need a second in order to pull it up. Does anybody have any questions so far?
We have a great active listening audience. Well, something happened on my end. I don't know if it's for everybody, but I just have a white screen. Oh, there we go.
That was my fault in pulling up the career profile.
Oh, no, that's fine. It's just like I've had tech issues today, so I wasn't know if I was like a standalone somewhere. That's happened.
I know we're not things that have periodic tech issues, and I know everybody ends up being pretty patient about that. I just gotta say I appreciate your patience with us. This is the technology piece of things has been something for all of us to learn and figure out. So here is the career profile form that you can download from the IPSworks.org website. And you'll notice this whole first page, the face sheet, it has, first of all, the click to enter text. So it has boxes to be able to enter text. This whole first face sheet is really about the person making the referral and what it is that they have to say about the person. So are they a case manager, a therapist? Are they a housing case manager? Are they a voc rehab counselor? Who are they? What is the person saying about the work? And it sounds like, it's kind of third person because it is. We want to know what the referral source is saying about what they've been told about by the person about work, and education and their strengths and job type. And you can see the person making the referral and the title then is on the bottom of the page. This is actually something you can make copies of this page and give to the different referral sources that you've got so that they can start out with the kind of the information about demographics and that kind of thing. And then it launches directly into the actual career profile itself. And you can see that it says right off the bat, it's intended to be during the first few weeks of meeting with someone, and sources of information are the person, certainly, but not necessarily just the person. It could be family members. It could be other folks that are important to the person. What I've done in the past when I end up talking to a person about doing the career profile is I've said, we all get support from somebody. I get support from my family. Do you get support from your family? And are they somebody that might be knowledgeable about what you've said over the years that you would like to do? And could they come and also be a piece? So I just ask folks right off the bat. I see, what is the website to get this form? IPSworks.org, O-R-G. And we'll make sure to send out the career profile as part of what we send out when we say thank you for attending this. So we'll make sure that you get that as one of the attachments to the email that we send out, with also the PowerPoint presentation. All right. So the career profile is broken into sections. You can see this one is work goal. I find that if you ask a person what it is that they want to do, you may get a different answer than if you ask them about a dream job. I know that various of the people on my caseload over the years, when I've asked them what they wanted to do, they said, I don't know. But when I ask them about a dream job, I've gotten things like, I had a gal one time that said, you know what? I love to make cakes and I love to rearrange my house. I think I'd actually like to be a wedding planner. I've had people say, I love working with wood, or I love tinkering with cars, or I'm great with my hands, and that dream job actually stimulates the thought process related to, what have I always had fun with? What have I always liked? What might I want to do? And I think that's why it's the first question under work goals, is it's so very important. Sometimes I even ask people, think back to being a kid. When you were a kid, what did you think you wanted to be when you grew up? Because very often there's still some validity in that. Very often there's still some thought process in regards to, I thought I would appreciate that, and it was something that was important to me. So you see, it's got long-term career goals. And it should also be something that you put down, want a survivor job right now, where it talks about the type of job you think you would like to have now. It's okay to say survivor job to keep a roof over my head while I'm working on my long-term goals, and just say what that is. Part of this is being very clear about what it is you're doing to help the person. And so if they've got long and short-term goals, it's important to get them down now, and important to let them know, just because you get a job doesn't mean we have to quit working together. We can continue working on those long-term goals. You can see things like what appeals to you about the type of work. So I'm gonna I'm gonna tell my Batman story. One of the employment one of the employment specialists that I supervised had a gentleman on his caseload that said he wanted to be Batman, and that was his dream job. And the employment specialist was a little stumped for the moment, so we got into the details of what is it about Batman is interesting to you. What is it about Batman it causes you to think that that's what you want to do? Well, it turns out the guy liked the cool car. And cool cars are something we can work with when it comes to doing the job search piece of things. Had another gentleman say that he wanted to be a pro wrestler. Did you know that Paulsbo, at least at one point in time, had a pro wrestling circuit? I didn't until I started researching. When they say what it is that is their dream job, we don't ever want to say, gosh, you can't do that because, and I'm sure you don't. But we went a step further and we started researching in regards to, is there a pro wrestling circuit, and is that something to get into, and how might he do that? Well, it turns out him living in Moses Lake, he didn't have the money to move to Paulsbo. He didn't have the ability to move to Paulsbo at that point in time. And so the conversation shifted. This is where it's one of those, not going to happen all in one session. It's going to happen in more than one. And he decided he wanted to do some other things here in Moses Lake to earn some money to be able to move to Paulsbo so that he could pursue his dream. So what is it that appeals to you about this type of work? If you get a Batman or a pro wrestler, that's going to be incredibly important to you to find out. It's equally important to know what kinds of things you don't want to do. Here's one where I was talking about, that's a networking question. Do you know people who are working what types of jobs? What do you think about those jobs? Any employer that hires someone is thankful when they have an existing employee that knows the person that can put in a good word for them. It increases their comfort level. They have a little better idea that what they're getting in regards to hiring a new employee might be a person that they want. And so that particular question and the networking piece of things is incredibly important. We had a gentleman one time on, not my caseload, but the caseload of one of the other employment specialists that had pretty severe autism. And in going through this conversation, he said, well, my sister owns a secondhand store, and obviously not quite in those words. But it turned out that she hired him to do the cleaning of the shelves because the shelves were always dirty, and that was something that was a particular strength of his, cleaning and organizing. We wouldn't have known that had we not ended up asking this question about, who people are working in what types of jobs. Darren mentioned the whole issue with COVID right now, and that people are, I think in kind of a lot of cases, fearful about going out into the community because of fear of catching COVID. And so this ends up bringing up that topic, and is a great time to have the conversation about how do you remain safe? What kinds of things do you do in order to sanitize your hands, to wash your hands, to, where can you get a shot or your series of shots and that kind of thing. This brings up that conversation. How many of you are working with people who are in education, that they've decided on a career goal that's going to require that they go back and maybe finish a GED, maybe get some college experience or college education? I know that asking this question often brings to mind to people that they could go back to school, when in fact that's not something that even occurred to them. That really they have a long-term goal that would be supported by further education, but that's not necessarily something they think about unless you remember to ask these kinds of questions. And you can see it talks about what kind of training. Apprenticeships are such an amazing way for a person to move forward in their career, do learning, and in a lot of cases get paid for it. Various different apprenticeship programs have the opportunity to be paid while you're actually being an apprentice and before you become a journeyman and whatever else, and whatever the career that you're looking at. And I don't think that it's something that we bring up as often as we might, were it not, once again, for this this particular question. I see Pam says she has several going back to school. Good job, Pam.
Hey, Dawn.
Yeah.
One thing, that I learned in one of the reviews, that this person was incarcerated for quite a long time, but he had really worked so hard to get different certification while he was in that environment. And that kind of opened up doors after he was released, because he had a set, foundation of skills and abilities to build upon his release. So if we're incarcerated, it's also good to kind of see if they've had some of that specialized training. And the other thing I just recently saw was quite a few people involved in the Job Corps as also a place to get some training and some certifications as well. Absolutely, good point. I know, and bringing that up, and I'm glad that you did. There were occasions when I worked with youth, and Foundational Community Supports, IPS, allows you to work with individuals from 16 years old and older. But I worked with various youth that needed housing too. And I know with COVID, the Job Corps aren't doing it the same way as they had done. But back when now that we're in phase 3, hopefully they're able to have their housing an active option again, and that would allow for youth that needed a place to stay while they were learning to be able to do, because Job Corps offers the housing too. So you can see, once again, military training. Was there military training that person went through that caused them to have a specialty of sorts when they're going to look for work? I'm going to flip through this. These are kind of repetitive to some degree. What educational institution would you like about it, and that kind of thing. One of the things that I will say is, as you're looking at that kind of thing, it can bring up, how, and there are more questions about how well did you learn? Were you in special ed in school? Did you have difficulties with test taking? Did you have difficulties with this or that? Awfully good information for setting you up to be able to do the job coaching that might need to be done with a person. If a person has difficulties taking tests, and part of what they're doing in that first day or two is online learning related to the agency's policies and procedures, Safeway comes to mind. I've sat through the Safeway orientation with individuals
at Walmart for that matter, a couple, 3 times. And if they had difficulties taking tests in school, that could well be the same case with the orientation that they're going through in some of the larger corporations, since they do a lot of it online. And then after each segment, they end up having to take a test. You know, one of the things, and I think someone mentioned in the chat box that the career profile could be something where folks sort of at a repository for things like resume. When you ask the question, do you have copies of degrees, licenses, certificates, resumes, your ID, things along that line, that can get us started on helping a person to look for those things, to apply for those things, and then to be able to scan and upload them so that the person would have access and not have to carry with them the actual document itself.
Hey, Don, I just wanted to add a few more things about education and that process.
Please. Absolutely.
That sometimes talking about military and education can also be traumatic events because it could trigger things. I've worked with people who have been dishonorably discharged from the military. So going through some of the information, it could also be a little traumatic, but it also, you know, one of those opportunities to find out what actually happened and to get a more broader picture of that. The other thing that I've also encountered with a lot of folks, job seekers, many have gone to school, but maybe they haven't completed their degree, and maybe just need a little bit of help, you know, to get a few more credits to get that certification, or to take a test. But also, they might have encumbered debt going through that, so that there could be some more trauma and some more shame around some of those issues that we can, you know, talk about and help alleviate some of those pressures, because those are definitely real pressures that people face because they tried to do, you know, something more autonomous and independent on their own. So just be aware of that, and there might be some, you know, excuse me, I'm having trouble breathing today. There might be some student services or something too that can help somebody that are in school or reintroduce that educational process together with the team.
Good. Yeah. One of the things I would mention too, I know IPS is focused in a couple of the different principles on DVR. If a person's been through a training program, they haven't succeeded because of disability issues or whatever, and they've gone into default on their funding, their financial aid. DVR is actually in the past, if it's relevant to the person's work goal and the work goal that they have related to what it is they're going to do at this point in time, DVR has been known to pay for the first quarter of college to get people out of defaults in their loans and grants. So that's something else to be aware of in regards to a reason why one might want to help a person to access DVR services. Yes, they are still in order of selection. Yes, it does take a long while on the waiting list, but talking college, there isn't a time limit on that necessarily. You know, we've talked about the fact that the form is a little long, and here you'll notice it says if individual is not interested in additional schooling or tech training right now, skip to the next set of questions. So even the form itself recognizes it's a little long, and maybe they're trying to skip things to move on. How often do you guys look at Occupational Outlook for a job? When a person, or I shouldn't say even a job, for a career, because I think all of us got into things that we hoped would be sustained over a period of time, and we hope the same thing for the people that we serve. So this even talks about, you know, what is the occupational outlook for those jobs? When do you want to start? I know I ended up trying to go through a master's program, and I say trying. When I got this job, I no longer had a caseload, and I had to drop out of my master's program. But each school is a little different, especially now that things are online, and applying for financial aid and those things, it takes longer than any of us might think. And so helping a person to work through what do those timelines look like is an important thing to do. What's your time frame for completing? All of those things are, a person may or may not have considered those kinds of things. Are you familiar with unions? Have you worked much with unions when you have ended up helping people find jobs? I am not a unions expert. I've learned a little more over time. I think probably a lot of the people that I served didn't have any more information than I did about unions. So this is something that brings up a good conversation about Safeway, as example. You have to join the union in order to work there. Various other agencies and companies, you have to join the union in order to work there. It's a good time to have that conversation. If it's a type of job the person wants to do that's going to require being part of a union, it's a good time to start talking about that kind of thing. Here's the thing I was talking about yeah, go ahead.
Oh, that's another thing I've used, Division of Oak Rehab for as well, to kind of get those initial dues paid for by DVR to get somebody going, like as an example at Safeway. And I know it's a lot more difficult with DVR, but it could be a resource that could be really valuable if they're found eligible for services.
Very good point. I see Pamela Williams said that she's worked with a union. I think sometimes they're wonderful. In fact, I had a person that was in trouble at work, and the union actually ended up helping them to save the job. And so, it can go both ways, and I think it depends on who the union representative is. But, it can be a marvelous thing. And so really important to have some knowledge about that if you're moving forward. I mentioned that the talk about school experiences and how it worked for you can really end up guiding you when it comes to job coaching. This kind of thing, social situations, was it okay? Was it a problem? It's really good to know in advance if a person had a problem with social situations in school, possibly going to happen at work, and it kind of sets the tone for, if you're there and doing job coaching and you're on break with the person in the break room, helping them to join a group in the break room and introduce themselves and start a conversation and, start to get to know people that way. Taking tests, as I mentioned, with some of the large companies where they do that online learning initially, and you have to take a test after each online segment. Important to know if the person had problems with taking tests. If they learn better by reading, by hands-on, but if they have concentration or memory issues. These are all huge, related to just their success in the job, and important to know. Using computers, how many jobs has anybody run into recently that don't have a computer as part of them? It boggles my mind the things that used to not be at all computer related that are now computer related. And so if a person doesn't know how to use a computer, it's good to be forewarned about that.
Sometimes now, Donna, you have a smartphone to be able to get your schedule and complete tasks and things. So I know I had somebody work with Amazon in their distribution center, and it was all, virtual based for getting their schedule and coordinating things. So it could be a huge, skill challenge for folks to be able to technology and to be able to use it effectively.
Really good point. And I think this time of COVID and meeting virtually has been a time where we've been able to help to teach people how to use the different resources. And from that standpoint, has actually been kind of a good thing. But you're right, there's lots of folks that growing up didn't have, access to a computer at home because it just wasn't in the finances. It wasn't a priority. So they're not as computer savvy or cell phone savvy as they might be. So related to starting school in general, but, just kind of thoughts about even going ahead and working. I like this chart about what do you need in order to start school. Do you have to have a computer? Help navigating the campus. One of the gals that I supervised, we used to tease her about, she was the college queen because she had a number of people on her caseload that did want to go back to college and had high anxiety. And so one of the first things that she would do with that person is go out to the college campus and walk around with them and conduct their session while walking around on the college campus and familiarizing the person to help decrease their anxiety. Same kind of thing could happen with jobs. Maybe you go to where the employer is located, and if it's a store or something like that that the person's interested in, take a walk around. Help them to feel comfortable in that environment. I think there's lots of things like that that we don't learn unless we do something like this. Let's see here. Work experience, and I'm, when you download the form, you'll get to see more about it. We're, I think, just covering the high points today. Work experience, this is obviously repetitive because people in lots of cases have more than one job. But how many hours per week? How did you find the job? What did you like about it? What did you dislike? What was your supervisor like? I have worked with individuals that wouldn't do well with a supervisor of the opposite gender. And so knowing that in advance is a good thing, especially once you get to know an employer and you know who the supervisor is going to be, and maybe avoid putting a guy who has anger issues about women with a female supervisor. I mean, some of these kinds of things are pretty huge that could be devastating if, in fact, the person has ended up in the wrong setting because of lack of knowledge about them. Why did you leave the job? Incredibly important to know in relationship to finding the next one. And you can see this has multiple sections. NA person has only had one job. This is the kind of thing when I say fill the thing out completely. If they have only had one job, check the box. Then we don't look and think, did they not fill it out? What happened there? Why wasn't there additional information? Military experience, cultural background, same kind of thing as potentially, helping to find a job where perhaps the supervisor is of the opposite gender and would create problems if the person had to work for them. An example being, and this is kind of an odd example, but my boyfriend's daughter was talking about an experience that she'd had with someone where she was talking about going to New York, and she's from Florida. And the person actually got real up in arms and said, "Why would you go to a Yankee state?" I wouldn't have considered that as even a potential issue. And you don't know what kinds of things might go on in a person's mind unless you talk a little bit about culture, about background, maybe about ethnicity. What special events or holidays do you celebrate? Sometimes folks have to have schedules that will accommodate. I've had a number of people over the years that, because of their Christian beliefs, would not work on a Sunday, and so needed to find an employer that was amenable to that. And thankfully, there are lots of them out there. Here we have, is it important for you to work with a supervisor who's male or female? Have you ever felt discriminated? Go ahead.
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to add to kind of knowing what people are doing in the community, because sometimes people can be very faith-based and have set social support or meetings or Bible study that they might find a lot of support, which might impact their schedule. That's always good to know about. And a lot of people have kids, and sometimes that can be a very demanding schedule in terms of blocking out time that you need to be aware of, that they need to be there for support of their children, or when the kids are in school, that might open up that time frame to really focus on work.
Absolutely. Well, and in relationship to kind of a benefits planning type of scenario, if a person has kids and no income, are they on work first? TANF. If they're on work first, there are still, in circumstances, and it's individualized, but the opportunity to have childcare paid for, but you got to work it out in advance. And frankly, if a person's on work first, they have an individual responsibility plan with their work first worker, and you as an employment specialist need to be a piece of that. Individuals get credit for the amount of time they are involved in work-related activities, and there were multiple times when, as an employment specialist, I would talk to the work first worker and have the person get credit for what they did with me while they were working with me. So, childcare and that kind of question can even lead to that conversation about, are you on work first? Is that something we need to consider in benefits planning when we're moving forward? So this is, I mentioned, and obviously it's clear to you that this is such a well-rounded document and causes you to put all those puzzle pieces together to make sure, first of all, that we do no harm, but secondly, that we're really supporting and helping the person in the way that we need to. In regards to foundational community supports and the people receiving services, the greater majority of them have a diagnosable mental health issue. And by that, I mean it's been diagnosed at some point in time in the past in their records. When AmeriGroup looks, they can see that kind of thing. And knowing that that's the case, it's easy to assume then that people on your caseloads are likely to have a mental health issue. Very honestly, anybody who is unemployed and wants to be has the stage set for anxiety and depression at the very least. And so we want to know about, have they been diagnosed with a mental illness? How does it affect them? What are the signs of a flare-up, signs and symptoms of a flare-up, and how do you cope? Do you have medications with side effects? And, an example being, various folks on medications that cause dizziness, sure not going to help them find a job where they have to get up on a ladder. I mean, that's preaching to the choir, but where do you find that out unless you ask any of these kinds of questions? Physical health. I ended up caseload-wise over the years with a fair number of folks that came into the mental health agency that I worked for saying, I'm depressed because I can no longer do the job I was doing because of physical health issues. I had a gentleman that was a carpet layer who, at a fairly young age, because he'd spent so much time bent over and securing the carpet and stretching it out and this and that he had a huge hump in the middle of his back and had horrible back problems and was very depressed that he wasn't going to get to do that anymore. So asking about those physical health issues and kind of what can they do now and how can we help them find the things that they need to find are incredibly important. Cognitive health, problems with memory and concentrating. I know there were lots of times that I helped people come up with checklists because their memory was not what it could be. And so from a coaching standpoint, this is pretty huge in relationship to what kind of accommodations might you ask for. What kinds of things might we do in order to help you succeed in the job if there's an accommodation needed? You can see it says what things have helped with these issues in the past. There was one time and I was horrified. It was like the goofiest mistake. I helped a gal get a job. We went to the first day of the job and I found out she didn't have her picture ID. So she couldn't fill out the I-9. So she couldn't couldn't start the job. I mean, that is the most basic employment specialist need, is knowing right off the bat that they have their social security card, their picture ID, and that kind of thing. So that when you go into that first day, you don't do what I did, which was to have that deer in the headlights look because they didn't have what they needed to fill out the I-9.
Hey, Don, I just wanted to add to that on things that people need. I worked with a job seeker who lived in a residential facility. So we had to coordinate with the food service department. Well, we had to ask if they could make a lunch and that he could have that with him, have lunch at work. So there's sometimes talking with people and learning more about them, there's even more challenges that pop up that's not necessarily just limited to those questions. But that was one of the takeaways I had, is like, wow, there's always something to be aware of.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I'm sure that all of you listening have found the same kind of thing, that you think maybe you're right on top of it and something new sort of slaps you in the face. I love to not get slapped in the face with that kind of information. So I'd love to have information in advance to know where the person's coming from and what they might need in order to be successful. Transportation. I noticed that one of the other things, how will you get to work? Whether you're urban, rural, whatever you are, transportation always seems to be an issue. So very rarely is it something that the person has fully worked out. And that ends up being kind of a deciding factor sometimes in regards to where you will work. One of the things to be, just to mention as an option, our Pathways to Employment website has a function where you can actually have the person search per their address for employers that are close to them. So if transportation is an issue, they can pop up a list of employers that are close to their address, so maybe they even have the option of walking there. And I think that can be also a good tool for those people that have said, I don't know what I want to do, to just pull it up and say, well, you know what, let's look to see what kinds of businesses are close to where you live. Let's see what there's available. Interpersonal skills. I think there's that's one of the big considerations in regards to helping people find work. I know that pretty often over a period of time, there were folks on my caseload that just did not get along well with others. And so finding that information out early on is a good thing. And frankly, if that's the case, you're going to find it out just by interviewing them. But over and above that, sometimes people would sort of sneak up on you related to, they seem really nice, they seem to engage well, but then to find out that they in fact don't get along well with others is, one of the things that you really need to know to help them find a job that's a good fit. Who can help us think about jobs you would enjoy? This gets back to that piece of, do you have family members? Do you have friends? Do you have a pastor who's talked to you about employment and has some great ideas? Could they come in and talk with us too? Because that person then is going to become part of their support team overall. They become more invested in helping the person succeed when they've had the opportunity to come in and kind of discuss what things that they're aware of that would work for the person. Asking right up front, once you're employed, who's going to be a good person to support you. Here's that benefits planning piece I was talking about. Do you receive any of the following benefits? I did a fidelity review sometime here in the past where when I brought up benefits, the staff said SSI, SSDI. Yeah, those are a piece of it. But what about their housing subsidy? If they get a job and that housing subsidy goes away, are they earning enough money to actually pay for rent? It says food stamps. I know that's, food. Do they lose part of their food benefit if they end up getting a job? And once again, are they making enough money to be able to pay for what it is that they need? But there's other things. Sometimes people have, like individuals who have disabilities and are drawing off of their parents' account. It's not SSI, it's not SSDI. I think they used to call it DAC. I'm not sure if that's what, disabled adult child. And so that's an issue that's specialized and really would require some specialized benefits planning that most of us don't have the knowledge to be able to do. So this gets you started on knowing, does the person need benefits planning? Is it pretty straightforward? Once again, Pathways to Employment website has a benefits estimator. It's not a benefits plan, but it allows individuals to put in their specific information, and it sort of spits out then, here's some of the considerations when you go to work. And it's definitely at least a starting point to say, wow, there's more here than I am capable of dealing with as a supported employment staff, and so I'm going to refer them to a benefits planner. The other thing is we found out from the says IPS Employment Center at the Rockville Institute. It's Westat at this point in time. We asked the IPS folks, if we do the benefits estimator and print it, will that suffice as part of the benefits planning if we do a fidelity review? And they said yes. So be aware that that's an option available to you.
Hey, Dawn?
Really, yeah, please.
One thing I learned that I hadn't thought about, but just with COVID and furloughs, some people actually had, uninsurance employment benefits coming in. So that's definitely something to be aware of and ask as people have lost their job, those not to go back or weren't able to go back and now re-entering the workforce, just to be sensitive about those Washington State benefits.
Sure, absolutely, and that's a good one. Thanks for bringing that up. And obviously, where it says other, and you say click here to enter text, unemployment would be one of those things. that you definitely need to be aware of when you're doing when you're helping a person to look for a job. Do you have them? When are they going to run out? And that kind of thing is incredibly important. And then this allows you to say in your career profile, referral made to benefits planner. If no referral, why not? This is that part of that documentation paperwork trail. Are you doing benefits planning, or are you referring somebody to a benefits planner? I mentioned disclosure, and that's one of the other IPS principles. And over and above that, it's, I guess, more important than that, it's the HIPAA principle. Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. You guys know HIPAA. We're not allowed to give out information unless the person gives us permission to do so through a release of information. This allows us to have a pretty extensive conversation with the person about, do we talk to an employer on your behalf? And to document that that's the case. Once again, with staff turnover and various things, or even just memory, when you have 20 people on your caseload, trying to remember who said what about, can I disclose to an employer or not? In my mind, it's mandatory to have it written down someplace so you can go back and look and say, oh yeah, here's what they said. Here's what they indicated that I can cover. Very often when doing fidelity reviews, and even in my own personal experience, I've gone through fidelity reviews. We had 3 of them when I worked at the agency I was working for. And we had the greater majority of folks say, no, you can't talk to employers on my behalf. Very honestly, the fidelity reviewer in that case said, then you're doing it wrong. and they were right. When we changed the way that we talk to people about what we might say to employers, then the people on our caseloads changed to saying, yeah, we could do it far more often. What I would typically do when I was talking to a person about disclosure would be to say, I'm not going to tell them about your diagnosis. That's not their business. But what I might say is, a little disorganized, and we found that a checklist works, or some problems with memory, and we found that a checklist works, or various things where a person has a challenge. What's the accommodation that fixes that challenge? And make sure to give both of those pieces. And so when I talk to a person, I say, I'm not going to give your diagnosis, but here's what I might say. Is that okay with you? If you just say, can I talk to an employer on your behalf? And if somebody asks me about that, my response is, no, you can't. I want to know what you're going to say. And this sets the stage for that. Talking about the advantages of disclosing versus not. And the scenario is, too, with disclosure, it isn't going to necessarily be the same with every employer, which is why it needs to be discussed more than once. If you're helping a person to find a white collar, if you will, kind of a job, maybe it's in a behavioral health setting where, they kind of get the whole idea of people having disabilities or challenges and maybe the need to talk about that. Perhaps somebody's applying for a job to be a peer. If that's the case, you have to disclose, kind of some diagnostic information and that you're in recovery and what that looks like, as opposed to if you're applying for a job at Walmart, you're not going to share that same level of information. And so this disclosure piece is great in the career profile. Definitely gets you started on all the different topics you need to discuss, but it's not a one and done thing. And so you may have to supplement with the disclosure worksheet that IPS Works also has. Substance use. Employers can't ask this. We can, in order to help to steer a person, to making decisions about what it is that they want to do. I've had lots of folks on my caseload in the past that smoked marijuana and had no intention of ceasing to do so. And so for those agencies or companies that do drug testing where they wouldn't pass, I would spend some time talking about, your choice to make. This particular employer will do drug testing, and so you're not going to be able to get a job with that employer. So you have a decision to make. Is the job more important? Do you want to quit smoking marijuana in order to be able to get that job? If you don't want to quit smoking marijuana, maybe consider other jobs. So it's time to, just make some decisions and do some thinking about it. So this is a great way to bring up that topic and have people kind of consider where they're at with things. Legal history. I have to say, even with this, a lot of the folks on my caseload weren't able to remember dates, weren't able to remember the actual title of whatever the conviction was and that kind of thing. And in some cases, it just alerted us to the need to get online and see if we could help them look up that information. Talked to a number of agencies recently that are working with people that have parole officers, they have, they're a sexual offender, and it limits the places where they can work. And so it's important to know that kind of thing in advance. And then daily activity. You know, if I'm a early to riser, getting me a job on the, you know, swing shift is probably not going to work, where I have to stay up till midnight or whatever when I finally get home from my job. Same kind of thing. If I, you know, never get up until noon, you're probably not going to want to help a person get a job that starts at 6 in the morning. Hobbies and interests. This kind of gets back to the gal that wanted to be the wedding planner, where she said she loved to make cakes and to rearrange her house and that kind of thing, and she really wanted to be a wedding planner. Very often, if a person said they didn't know what they wanted to do, this hobbies and interests question helped to kind of stimulate thought process about types of jobs that related to things that they enjoyed doing. And then we have staff signature and date. And certainly what I've seen a lot of agencies do at this point in time is to just go ahead and, you know, type in, due to COVID restrictions, verbal signature only and date kind of a thing. So that's it. That's the document. That's the wonderful career profile that I'm hoping you will all use and complete to its fullest extent. Any questions? And saying that, Darren, did you have other things to add to at this point in time?
You know, I think it's a very you know, dynamic document, and I'm just looking at like page 14 of 14. There's a lot of information, but I have found in particularly working with individual job seekers and then working with agencies implementing tools, there's definitely some pushback on this to complete it. And that's why I really encourage people to do it in stages, because I think everything is so valuable. It covers so many dimensions to learn about the individual. And until you get to some of those different specifics, you're not even going to be aware. There might be some trauma specific or some triggers, even about somebody getting a paycheck if they have some SUD issues, or maybe some anxiety issues, or maybe there could be other things. But until you sit down and talk and go through some of these prompts, there's a lot of information we wouldn't get as we try to help somebody get to employment and hopefully get into a career, because this isn't just about survival job placement. It's about a good fit and, you know, really providing support to get people to change their lives. Because one thing I was even thinking about on the benefit piece, I don't think there was a question like, you know, do you want to get off benefits? Sometimes I'm pleasantly surprised by somebody said, I would rather work and move off benefits because it makes me feel more independent and less reliant on a government system. And unless you have some of those conversations, you know, we wouldn't really know what would happen if somebody goes over substantial gainful activity, and what's the time frames to see if it's going to be okay and then move on. So there's a lot of interest. So really encourage people to really work through it and hang in there, because there's a lot of valuable information to learn about people and to get a foundation for the process for next steps.
Absolutely true. All right, I'm not, oh, hang on. Looks like there might be one new question or comment. Yeah, we're actually ending in 2 minutes. So if there are questions, now's a great time to bring them up. I mentioned earlier, we will send out the slides. I will send out the career profile. And we'll make sure that the link to the ipsworks.org is in the thank you for attending email that we send out. If you have additional questions, you can respond to that email, and we'll surely do our best to answer them at that point in time. Thank you very much for being here today. Thank you for your tolerance of the fact that we had to shift kind of the topic at sort of the last moment. We apologize for that. We do hope that we're going to be able to have the gentleman speak to motivational interviewing at a later date. So that will be something to watch for in the upcoming webinars that we offer. I will say that a couple of the webinars coming up in the not too distant future are going to be done by Pat Tucker. I'm not sure if any of you have had the opportunity to see Pat Tucker do a webinar. She's amazing. And so keep watch for those as well. Thank you so very much. And I think, Darren, unless you have anything else to say, it's 10 o'clock and we'll end the presentation at this time.
No, thank you for everybody, and thank you for hanging in there as we pivoted topics today. I really appreciate it. And thank you, Don, for driving us through the process today. Kudos to you.
My Wi-Fi decided to behave for a change, thank goodness.
That's right. Thank you, technology.